Hello, my magnificent pre-calculus class. We are ready for another online adventure. Today we are reviewing reflection about the x-axis. The graph of y equals negative f of x is the graph of f of x reflected about the x-axis. When we're graphing these trig functions, if the a is greater than 0, then the sine function, you have a mountain, then a valley. If the a is less than 0, for y equals negative 1 sine of x, then you see here we have a mountain and a valley. Here we have the valley and the mountain. Also for cosine of x, you see it's sort of like this, but then you do the reflection where you have the a is a negative 1. You see it's turned upside down, reflection through the x-axis. When we have the tan, as we move from left to right, it's increasing function. But if you have the negative, you see how it reverses, and now it's a decreasing function. So this is if the a is greater than 0, if the a is less than 0. Also, our other three trig functions, let's look at that. For the cotan, if y equals cotan of x, you see as we move from left to right, decreasing function. But if you make it negative, you see how it becomes an increasing function as we move from left to right. We have two branches when we do our cosecant function, like a concave up and a concave down. But when you do the negative cosecant of x, you see the concave up becomes concave down. The concave down becomes concave up. It's just a shift along the x-axis when you the difference in the cosecant and the secant. But here, when you have the secant, you see you have a concave down, a concave up. But if you have the negative secant, you see the concave down becomes a concave up. The concave up becomes a concave down. So that is reflection through the x-axis. We're going to graph a cosecant function using our 5 steps again that I'm sure you've memorized by now. So let's look at that function that we're going to graph. So here we have our graph of y is equal to negative cosecant of 2x minus pi over 2. Remember, the first thing we're going to do, we're going to graph the sine, which is its reciprocal function, because when we graph the sine, we will determine where we have our vertical asymptotes. So we take our bx minus c, our step 1, put it between 0 and 2 pi. We're going to undo subtracting pi over 2 by adding pi over 2. And when we do that, we get pi over 2 less than or equal to 2x, which is less than or equal to 5 pi over 2. Remember, 2 pi is the same thing as 4 pi over 2 plus the 1 pi over 2, which gives us what? The 5 pi over 2. But we have a 2x here. Remember, our goal is to get 1x here. So the way that we undo multiplying by 2 is we divide by 2. But dividing by 2 is the same thing as multiplying by its reciprocal, which is 1/2. So we end up with pi over 4 is less than or equal to x, which is less than or equal to 5 pi over 4. Remember, when we're doing our sine curve, our first critical number and our fifth critical number. Then we're going to do our period, which is the absolute value of, it's 2 pi rather, divided by the absolute value of b, which will give us pi. The increment is going to be the period divided by 4, which is pi over 4. Then we're going to find our 5 critical numbers. The first critical number that we got from our inequality is pi over 4. We add our increment, pi over 4. We get the second critical number is pi over 2. Add our increment, the third critical number, 3 pi over 4. Add our increment, 4 pi over 4, which reduces to pi. Add our increment, pi over 4, and we get 5 pi over 4. So here we have our 5 critical numbers that we're going to put along our x-axis on our graph. So the first thing we're going to do, remember, is graph this sine. So remember, this a is what, a negative 1? It's less than 0. So we're going to have a valley and then a mountain. So that's the very first thing we do. Then, well, let me go back and show you this. You see where this sine curve is touching the horizontal axis, that is where we're going to have our vertical asymptotes. So when I come over here, again, where the graph is touching the x-axis, I'm drawing my vertical asymptotes. And remember now, these vertical asymptotes are not a part of the graph. They're just to help us sketch the graph so that we won't make the branches too wide or too narrow. So here, you see this is a valley. Think about it, down in the valley, so it's concave down. This is a mountaintop, up on the mountain, concave up. So this is one cycle of our y equals negative cosecant of the quantity 2x minus pi over 2. And remember again, when you are watching this video, stop, rewind, review. Stop, rewind, review. And my love goes out to